Hello, my name is Jessica Putman, and I'm the student coordinator for the Roxbury Roundtables. I would like to welcome everyone to the Roundtables. Today our topic is Libertarianism in the U.S., the pros and cons. What is the movement about? And our host today will be Professor Michael Galganski.
Yes, Galganski.
Galganski.
Yes, so thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I guess I'm an impromptu host, so I'd like to introduce our panel here today. Over here we have
Andrew Shinsky, Law and Society major.
I'm Alexis Feynman, industrial design major.
Jake David, doing society major.
Nancy Abella, architecture, studies.
PhilaU, finance major.
Evan Laine, director of the Specter Center.
Anita Thomas, communications major.
Very good. So I welcome you all, and of course, to introduce myself, Michael Galganski. I'm the professor here of music history, actually. So I've been here for some time, and I've often wondered what's the connection between music and politics that might get into ideals and so forth. But one of the reasons I'm here is Professor Laine and I mean, we've talked a few times around the water cooler, just about what's going on in politics and so forth, and talking a little bit about my stripes of libertarian ideals. We talked about that, about the round table, and another reason I think why I came to Evan, just of an interesting topic, is I've developed an ideology as well, and I've actually, I don't know how much I can say politics-wise, but I've actually started a new political party. I actually have my hat in the ring for office. I'll leave that aside, but this whole thing, I've developed a new ideology called dignitarianism, which is basically an extension of closest to libertarian ideals and whatnot. So it's a pleasure to be here. So, okay, so I guess
This is the best thing is you've thrown out some terms. So let's start with the beginning and work our way. What is libertarianism as far as you understand?
Yeah, it's funny because the past history I haven't studied so much. I've been looking at some of the critiques of current libertarianism. To my understanding, the term goes back to the Enlightenment era. I think it was John Locke was one of the first to use the term, but let's say compared to at least more modern liberal philosophy and conservative philosophy, part of the tenets is one's own natural rights before codified in government policy and so forth. So some of the history goes through there, and then sort of popularized the American Revolution. In the 1800s, it sort of competed and branched out with other anarchist-type movements, which was one of the things I eventually criticized, where anarchy, of course, means no government. And it's interesting why that is often associated, for better or worse, with libertarian ideals. But it sort of diffracted, and then in more recent years, the Libertarian Party started in 1971, and there's other figures, Ron Paul, and so forth, who more popularized that in recent years.
I'd be interested in the panel. Is anyone familiar with libertarianism or follows that movement in any way? Go ahead.
Personally, I've been...
Introduce yourself.
Personally, I'm from Spain, first of all, so I'm sorry for my accent if you understand something. Well, I've been following libertarianism ever since, I don't know, like after the economic recession. I'm in a finance major, so I'm really into economics. And I was really curious about how the government was dealing with all the recession. So most of the policies they were taking were spending, credit expenditory, which is Keynesian economics. For example, and then I found out about this European school, which is called the Austrian School of Economics. So you probably know about that program.
Yes, what Kelso was it, or
yeah?
Oh, okay, yes, we talked before, so nice to meet you. But yes, that's one of the more modern things where there's a school, Austrian economics. So Rothbard, Murray Rothbard was a philosopher.
And they basically say that the government intervention is everything that causes the economic cycle. There's expansion of credit, then there's the crisis, then again the expansion of it, and so on and so on. So I felt I started doing my research, and then I found out about libertarianism, and I actually like the idea that libertarianism is goes for individual freedom. Like no government, like no one is gonna tell you what to do. I'll explain it better honestly, like individual freedom. So I thought that actually was pretty good because usually like there's like the right, which is associated with conservatism, and then there's the, which is like conservatism is like, again, in terms of economics, they usually like people tend to think is that it's okay, economic freedom, but then in terms of social freedom, is usually not as good in terms of tolerance with sexual freedom, ethnics, and that sort of stuff. And then there's the left wing, which is usually like economic, like the government intervenes in the economy, but there is freedom in the social aspect of it. So then I found about libertarianism, which had the two things that I like the most, which is no intervention in the economy and no intervention in the social aspect of the things. So I was like, well, that's perfect. So, and ever since then I started reading like I know there's one of these Austrian economists is Friedrich Hayek,
Right.
and he wrote this book about road to serfdom. And it's a really nice book. Like it opens your eyes and it makes you think that it's sort of like getting out of Matrix. You know, it's like wow, hold on. Like so, actually, the government like through taxes, like we're like there. It's like for them, taxes is theft, straight theft.
So for libertarians, taxes is theft. Government should not be taking money from people.
Like pretty much, yeah. Actually, yeah. Like,
Well, it's interesting because let's say others might have found, and I was more, when I first started my own politics, I leaned more left, and this was back when I got out of school, I entered the workforce, I became more interested in, political world around me, so I leaned left, and it wasn't really till Rod Plog, and he was pretty popular some years ago, who introduced some new ideas to me, but I say this because one would think between those ideals where conventional liberal is more socially free and conservative is more fiscally free. One would say, well, why hasn't it taken off more? And I think part of the issue is sometimes, and why I also started this new philosophy, is sometimes the tendency for libertarian to be associated with anarchy, no government, which myself I would disagree with. I still think there's a role in civics and governmental ethics and so forth. But it's interesting because why, if there's these ideals that are such appeal, why hasn't there been a libertarian president or others in office that are considered the minority party? I think so. Why that is, I mean, I have my own ideas, but I don't know if others have thought of that.
Just the rest of the panel. Your experience is excellent. Who else at least comes to the table with any preconceived ideas or any research regarding libertarianism?
This is Nancy. I follow politics a lot, mostly by watching Fox News. I've listened to talk radio sometimes and also seen other news channels. However, I tend to lean to the right. I understand that libertarianism is this idea to mix personal freedoms with economic freedom. However, I've heard these stories where there's beliefs of being allowed to have pot or other things legal, other drugs. I don't think that that's actually going to benefit this country, because I just don't think that having drugs legal will be beneficial for the society as a whole. However, I do not like the liberalistic point of view with government controlling and like supporting you. However, to what you said, I think liberals are more of the political correct police, because like everything has to be politically correct, and you can't be like loose with your language, which I find very annoying. However, with conservatism, I understand that economic freedom, there is controversy about like how much the government should be involved. Kind of, if you think about it, the government has its place, but I think what conservatives really want is the government to be more efficient with what they do. I don't really think they necessarily want to get rid of government or do anything to like take it out of the picture, but I think it wants it to be more efficient with the money that it takes in, therefore we have a surplus of money and not like a being in debt because we have like over $18 trillion in debt from last time I checked.
Anyone else have? Go ahead.
Yeah,
Say your name.
I'm Alex Feynman, industrial design major. And just, I guess going off that, I mean, like, the Declaration of Independence, like, the first 3 words are "we the people." So, I mean, going off of that, I mean, it should be about we the people. And, you know, if you're talking about drugs, hey, man, if somebody wants to do something, that's their own personal freedom. Also going into drugs, think about the pharmaceutical industry, or pharmaceutical business. It's huge. I mean, like, how many kids, you know, these days are taking Adderall regularly every single day? So I mean, as far as that goes, I don't think that's necessarily a major importance in the United States, or as far as ideals go. I'm more about personal and individual freedoms, whether you want to be gay, transsexual, or you want to do a lot of drugs. Should be up to you.
But you're going on the social aspect,
Yes.
as you defined for us. But how about on the economic aspect? Where should the government be involved in regulating businesses, or should there be a free market and markets should regulate themselves?
I think they should be more of like a referee, but like have very like little step in like businesses. And you know, if something goes wrong where there's a disagreement between like people who run a business, then maybe that could be settled by the law.
Yes, government has its place, but I don't think it should be with all this regulations that they currently have. But going back to your social point, I have nothing against that fact that people want to be gay or homosexual, whatever. But I disagree with the drugs. I think the healthcare industry is putting people on drugs too early and getting people hooked on this so that they spend money for it. So I think we're making a problem ourselves with the health industry, actually, because
It's more like a business.
I don't want to get lost on the drug
Right.
issue.
Right.
So we could spend all day going back and forth on the drug. Just on getting back to general libertarianism, is anyone else come to the table with any preconceptions? Say who you are.
Yeah, I'm Sophia. I didn't introduce myself. I don't know if I'm a part of the panel, but my first introduction to libertarianism was my acknowledgement of Colorado's policies. I'm originally from Colorado, and it was really interesting to me that the people of Colorado, or at least the majority of people in Colorado, would fight so hard for gun rights, but at the same time fight so hard for the legalization of marijuana. And those things seemed very contradictory to me. And so I came across libertarianism in that way, and I agree with you on how it takes best parts of the conservative and liberal standpoints and makes like a good mesh, but I would say though that this is just a capitalist take on anarchism, and that because me myself, not being a libertarian, I'm more of a semi-anarcho-socialist.
That'll be another table, another time.
I don't actually, none of these ideas are original, but people think that it's like this new age type party that is going to bring together the good parts of all society, which I believe is true. I do respect libertarianism. Libertarianists, I think that, of course, there's a lot that I agree with, being that the government should have very little say in what a person does with their life, economically and socially. But I just find a little, I have a few problems with saying that, trying to distance themselves from anarchism, which anarchism, it's not no government, it's personal freedom. That's basically what it is. And socialism, anarchism would be for socialism as libertarianism is for capitalism.
Well,
I think Andrew was saying that. Andrew?
This is Andrew. Going off of when Professor Galganski brought up John Locke and maybe another philosopher, Dennis Diderot, during the Enlightenment. The idea was essentially personal freedom, which is what Alexi brought up with the Declaration of Independence. So the idea of personal freedom and liberty is sort of this idea where you will have the right to pursue whatever path you so choose, which is like kind of ironic that it's taking, like you said, so long for us to even go back to such principles. They were our founding principles, now seemingly new, but in reality were the guiding principles of the Constitution, which was subsequently written after the Declaration of Independence. But I wanted to pose a question as to what you think maybe, if it is personal liberty versus maybe societal rights, like what do we owe one another, if anything at all? Because in actuality, a lot of people right now, with, just bring up maybe Obamacare, this like federalized idea of healthcare, what we owe to our neighbors, Social Security, policies that are so entrenched in our government and our country. So I was wondering just what you think about like going back or repealing those things and making us more of a libertarian society.
Right. I have to thank Andrew too, because I didn't recognize Andrew with a beard. He was in our music class a year ago,
Yep.
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
So welcome, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
So thank you. So yeah, I think what's interesting too is part of it can be resolved, because let's say if in my mind, if conservative is traditionally right and liberalism is traditionally left, to me the question is, well, what are they left and right of? And if one could say, the center, but what does that really mean? And I think what Andrew's pointing to, in my interpretation anyways, it's principle itself. So I actually coined another position, if you will. Instead of left and right, I actually call it exile, meaning if this gets into the theory, which I think is relevant, what is a right? If you go to the theoretics, if you take a right is a principle that is true, and you have dimensions, you have X, Y, Z dimensions. And in my mind, there are 6 principles, which is basically your property, known as the right to steal your stuff, your body, known as the right to violate that, the currency, known as the right to debase your money. Fourthly is your sovereignty, which I look at as your right to travel. 5th is the philosophy, the freedom of speech, and 6 is your spirituality. Now this gets theoretical, but if there are those 6 principles, you can align policy and just law to that. So let's say going then to something like...
Excuse me.
Yes.
So you're trying to follow a society?
Yes.
And for those 6 principles, who do you think they are applied to? Individual or the government? And who to enforce them?
Both, because the question then becomes as well, what is the role of government? This is something that Ron Paul, one of the things that he would talk about that to me if found meaningful, he would say, well, what is the true role of government? Is it something where I would agree with taxation? This is a controversial point to say, but I look at taxation as theft, because there's a gun behind it that says, give me your money or I injure you. It threatens the innocent. And by some arguments that I've heard, they say, well, why do we have taxation? I look at that as a presupposition that says, because we believe the citizenry are incapable of good and goodwill and benevolence, we will take from you. If you don't like it, too bad. So in my mind, the role of government is, it gets somewhat philosophical again, but to distill the conscience, meaning like when we have a trial in a civil court, we go through the process of learning what is ethical, and the thing that I think too that it should be based on ultimately, and this gets to the scopes of governments, is if you get into the jurisdictions, you could say you have the federal, then you have the state, then you have like the city, but if there's a few more that I think this could be an evolution politically, civically, you have the federal, you have the state, you have the city, then you can go to your property, then you can go to your home, you're the master of your own house, you also govern yourself, and the final agency, I think, is the conscience itself. Who can prove, what that is, but if it's true that we are from a creator, and this goes on as well, giving it to the law and so forth, but if we are creations from the divine, and we haven't been given the conscience to make good and bad judgment, the virtue that we've enjoyed in a civil society says, innocent until proven guilty. So why not extend that virtue of I honor and I dignify your goodwill. We set up means to honor that where people can have public trust. This is a new thing, but we set up public trust where if you want to give to the roads instead of, I think you also said the right to the comfortable
This
use.
is what you and I have spoken about.
Yes.
And this is the problem I see, I see in the libertarian movement. When manufacturers were allowed to manufacture vehicles or machines without regulation, they built death machines. They built the Corvair, and which had the engine was awful, there was no protection, if you got in an accident, you died. It was civil trial attorneys, and then finally them forcing regulations to be put for safety. They were forced into that because it cost them extra money to do it. When machines were made without guards and you had rotating blades, people were losing their arms and legs constantly. And then regulations came and saved them. I want to know how you counter the idea that I would say that left without regulation and only by the profit motive, that companies will not be safe, that they will not manufacture safe material, that we're going to have thalidomide, like in England.
Right.
We'll have drugs come on the market untested that will destroy ourselves and our children. And I see, and this is where our fundamental difference is, the fundamental nature of man isn't going to help the other man, but to help themselves. And I think I'm proven by history on that. So I would love for you to address that.
Yes. So 2 points. I think, let's say, the role of government is to be an apparatus to be conscionable. You can still have civil standards, which say, because let's say something like you build a house and a big piece of lumber isn't conscionable as the same way as a driver is behind a car. To me, it's proper to have a policy that says we regulate the building code so it doesn't pose a hazard where it will fall down and injure the innocent kind of thing. So I still think there's a place for that. Let's say, and I actually took this to court because I got this gets into the finer gradations as well, like gun laws and so forth. But let's say I actually went to court, I got a parking ticket, and I argued against it because I saw that as different than the house where you have, or a car. Well, let's say you go to the house again, it has hazardous stuff that
It's
isn't
special
conscionable.
center.
Yes, right. With the parking ticket, going back to some civil standards as policies, let's say you have a noisy neighbor, somebody to the parking ticket, but let's say you have a noisy neighbor, there's a difference, and this is where my lack of the study of law, I haven't studied as much, as a formal education, but the distinction between criminal law and civil policy, the policy I see is something that the individual citizen can enact and say, well, I have this mechanism, there's the noisy neighbors, if they're kept to themselves, they're not bothering anybody, but if they're bothering me, I can call the police, I can enact the policy to rectify that they're encroaching on my sovereignty, basically. So I think there is a place for the policy, there's a place for criminal law.
Let's just stop there. Okay,
Yeah.
so you would call, if you had some neighbors night and day destroying the peace, you would call the police and say, hey, please take care of it.
Yes.
But without taxes, who would pay for the police?
Right. So here comes, and here's where we disagree philosophically. If, let's say, now one of the things that's interesting too is the difference between private and public and social and civil. So in my mind, one can have a private belief that one says, if you will, one is the optimist, one is, let's say, the cynic, but there's a different views. So let's say if the one who says, I see people as having the choice to choose good or bad, to choose benevolence or not, let's say going into taxation, if someone doesn't, how do I put this? If someone says, well, I don't believe that someone else would pay, fine. Two issues. One is, though, let's say that lack of confidence in the goodwill of others, in my mind, doesn't rationalize imposing on someone else and say, because I don't think someone is going to endow, we're going to come and take your money. So,
Well,
yes.
let me ask the panel, because if you don't have to pay, start with you, Sophie, if you don't have to pay taxes, say you leave here and you're making 40 grand, you're going to end up paying about 13,000 in taxes. Okay, so you're going to walk home with a paycheck about 26, 27,000. And I gave you a choice, says, you know what, Sophie, you can be a good citizen of the United States of America and donate 1/3 of your salary to police and roads and our military and things like that. Or you have the choice of keeping that money for you and your family.
Well,
Honestly.
Honestly, I would give it to the government, but that is just me. Me and Michael have talked about this before, and I do believe that it's very idealistic. We've talked about this, and I disagree with some points because the thing that I appreciate most about libertarianism is that, like, with this weed and gun control thing, the people who smoke weed don't want necessarily to have guns, or maybe they do, but it's not, and the people who want guns don't necessarily want to smoke weed, but they respect each other enough to know that everybody deserves the same rights. And everybody, like, under the sun or on this land of America deserves the same rights as the next person. So the thing that I kind of disagree with in your philosophy is the idea that we should be left up to choice. Like, you got into specifics about a neighbor that was being too loud. Why is it our right to take away their freedom of their own household, even if it is loud, it's in their own household?
Of course. Well, yeah. If it's violating your sovereignty, your space, then you could say. Because
She says that you're violating their sovereignty and wanting to be loud, right?
And about the taxation, I do not believe that everybody is like you and me and will want to give to, like, the nation when they can just keep the money for themselves. The ideals that a lot of people have focus more on a self-centered platform, which is why we have this two-party dynamic right now. But it's highly improbable that that would be implemented and working.
If I could qualify a little bit, yeah,
Yeah.
because one thing that would add to that is, this is a new thing, but the introduction of public trust, because one of the things we don't have now is really the opportunity. It's kind of like, well, the money's taken, so I'd like to see where you get an annual report. Everything that's public and civic is on there, so you can put it to what you like, and at least the practical side is answered towards having a means to do that. So,
This is Nancy. But with taxation, at the moment, not all the taxes I think are fair. But going back to, are you willing to just give up a portion of your salary to fund public things? Probably not everyone will do that. As for me, I don't know. I have to be in the situation to actually decide that, because it's a hypothetical guess right now, because I don't have that kind of money to actually decide. And also, I need some of that money to survive myself. So,
And that becomes a very interesting issue. Yeah, Andrew, you can show us.
This is Andrew. Addressing your point before, talking about whether or not you would pay taxes if you didn't have to choose to do so. In the 19th century, the U.S. levels of donations were not unprecedented in this country because they were so much higher than they are today, because we think there's this apparatus to do it for us, rather than the goodwill of people that's actually diminished due to government stepping in, being the cynic that it is. And then you can argue after that, as Galganski said, you look to today, and there's people who don't pay any taxes, and there are people who pay an exorbitant amount of taxes. And where is the fairness in that argument? Because if you have people that reap all the benefits, if I call the police, the cops, if I pay 4 times the amount of taxes, they don't show up 4 times faster. They the inequity of this system is essentially, it doesn't trust its citizens to do the right thing. Whether or not they will or won't doesn't really matter, because it's not your decision to make. You're not allowed to tell what someone who's earned that money what to do with that money.
So I'd like to take on this question, the taxation. So this public trust. Do you know if the government don't have enough money from the tax to support a police force or any national security matter, and let's just say your trust work, do you know what's the first thing I will do once the tax are cancelled and government announce we can no longer support enough police force? The first thing I will do is I will go grab a bunch of veterans, experienced people, form up a company like G4S or Blackwater, and ask people to hire us to be your personal bodyguard or security. Also, I can get somebody to be your doctors. So you have your private doctor, and this voluntary type of tax, I will set my price bar lower than that. So I make a profit. Then people with not enough money, they will not pay the tax, and neither they will be able to hire us. So rich people
only the rich people will be
get
protected.
more powers, and there's no government stepping out to against us because we have more guns. And then there's competitive market coming over. I run a company. Then another guy came up with the same idea, run a company. Then we tried to take places for our business. We tried to expand our business. Then conflict happened. And now, since government don't have enough money, and according to Libertarian, they should step up the economy, and we have a free market, we can do basically anything we want to take the other company out of the game. So I mean, two companies with major conflicts, and we're both armed. I don't know where this is going.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say that regardless the policy, like also like another issue that usually people bring up regarding taxes is that money that the government is not going to be receiving, if in case there's no taxes, is not going to have a positive impact. Like for example, today I was taking a midterm on marketing, and I was talking about unethical business practices. Like for example, Apple usually moves all its capital to a tax-friendly place, like I don't know, like all these islands that are like tax-friendly, in order to not pay as much taxes. And people, if they say this might be unethical because now the society, the American society, is not benefiting from this tax, like in terms of social security and many other. But the libertarian thought is that actually, like all this capital that is not going to go through to the hands of the government is actually going to have ultimately it's going to have a positive impact on because that money is going to be invested. Because first of all, like in order, like prosperity comes from savings and then from investment, not from aggregate demand, which is the Keynesian way of thinking. So this money that Apple now has in its hands is going to go allocated into wise investment, because that's the other thing. Like if the government spends it and if they allocate the investment not wisely, and this investment entails a loss of money, every American citizen will be paying for it, because that's what the government does.
What Apple's doing is they're taking money that they would pay to the government, which would help with police, would help when they have all this money,
For example.
and they're evading the laws legally.
Legal, yeah.
In the United States, because there's not proper regulation to stop it. And they are getting a free ride. They're profiting from all the benefits of the American economy without helping. You was talking, Professor Galganski, about the goodwill. If Apple was truly a goodwill company, it would gladly pay those incredible profits that they make to invest in the American economy, perhaps even build a plant here instead of in China. But what they're doing, left unregulated, is escaping the system. That's their natural state. One thing, Burger King, an American corporation, if ever was, just bought a Canadian coffee shop. Why?
To avoid taxes.
To avoid taxes. So what I'm saying is that's the natural state of American corporations. To make more profits, they will take anything and go around the system and not be good citizens, as Mike would hope we would be, but rather be bad citizens, so that their CEO, instead of taking home $50 million in profits, he can take home 60 and say he's got more than his neighbor. So how do you answer that?
I'm gonna say that there's actually like empiric proof that if you go, there's an index called made by the Heritage Foundation, where you can see that all these countries that have the most tax-friendly policies are always on the top of the GDP and prosperity, like on the world, like such as like Singapore, Chile, Switzerland, New Zealand, Australia, all these countries. And usually the United States used to be on top of that, but ever since not since the 1971, which was when the Vietnam War, and then the Federal Reserve stepped in and they kicked out gold standard, which is another issue that were also like they had that increased inflation and so on and so on. But the U.S. used to be there, and with all these socially friendly policies, ever since then, in terms of freedom and GDP, it's like the other economies are catching up. And you can see even China, which used to be a more like social, like closed country, and it still is like sort of like a communist country. As soon as they started opening through the world, their GDP like skyrocketed. So that's why I believe all this tax friendly, you ultimately not only have a benefit obviously for the company that is not paying these taxes, but also for the society they live in.
But starting in the 70s, the wage earnings for the middle class people have started to stagnate, and so there's a greater gap between those who have a lot of money and those who don't have as much money. But I think that's part of the reason because of the policies that are towards socialistic versus economic. So there's a difference in how those will affect the people, because you can get an economy going by people spending money and having it exchange hands, because when you exchange capitalism, it actually makes everybody richer, but you can't do that when taxes impede you by taking away part of that money. But
An interesting point too, and we'll get to Andrew and Sophia, but let's say the question of how much taxation, which they bring to Evan as well, is if they're not paying their fair share, the question I ask, if principal is the guide, what is the principled amount of taxation? Let's say if someone says it's 30%, well, why is it 30% instead of 29 or 31? And when I see that, to me there is no principle to it because it's unethical. So I would ask, what is the proper amount? I don't actually believe there is, but for those who would endorse it, how much, how much should it be?
when you say a fair share, you gotta define that.
And that's a
because-
presumption, I would say.
Yes.
How am I to know what someone else's value is, or what they are to pay? And how do I know, I think to resolve part of it too, is how can I presume to know what someone else values? If someone wants to give to the armed forces, let them. If someone else wants to get to the museum, let them. I think that's part of how it's resolved too. So, but Andrew and Sophia?
Going again off what you said, if I'm going to pick on you, just very opposing views. You talk about that, corporations, the American corporate idea is a profit motive, but if that is true and you believe that, I ask, why? I mean, even if you own a phone, it's like you might not like them, but you still buy their products. You still endorse them by definition of trading with them, saying that you want their services. But wouldn't you think it'd be beneficial for the government to lower those taxes and bring those businesses back? Because it's not economically feasible for them to stay competitive when our government makes them incompetitive, which is why GM went out of business due to pensions and such like that. The banks went out of business because the government told them that they had to allow the American people to buy houses, which was in the 90s, which ended up with the economic recession we have today. So wouldn't you say, if you lower the taxes and there don't have to be an abolition of taxes, but just lowering them to bring people back, wouldn't that be more beneficial?
I just want to address two things. First, it wasn't the government forcing people to buy, telling banks to sell people houses or to give them the no-doc loans. The banks went on their own on this. That situation was unregulated, and that was the fault of the Bush and Clinton administrations, Republican and Democrat.
You mean Bush Sr.?
Bush Sr., yeah. And Bush Jr. too. Bush Jr. is Republican, Democrat, Republican. That's the way it went. Because there was a lot of profit to be made. The banks saw tremendous profit to be made on the junk loans that they're making for homes, which we all should have known was crazy, and we didn't see it because everyone was involved in the big army. But that's what happened when you don't have regulations in play. Then what these companies will do is what Jamie Dimon did and his whole company by selling the junk loans and actually selling short on their own customers because they knew it was junk. They were unregulated and made profit. So let's just want to make that clear. The government didn't force the banks to do it. They had a party. So, but addressing the second issue on taxes, the taxes should encourage business. Absolutely.
Should encourage?
Should, always. You should not kill businesses. But we also have a social issue as well. They also have to pay their way in a company, a country. When Apple benefits from the United States, it also should pay, as you will, Andrew, and as I do. Those companies should pay their fair way in taxes.
Do you
as
pay
well.
40%? Because it's the highest corporate
Yes.
tax rate in the world. I mean, why would anybody? It's the biggest market in the world, yet you have the biggest hindrance on business.
I have paid 40% for quite some time.
And it's. I'm not going to say it's not like fair. You can argue with that as you will. But going back to the other point about what is expected from the American people, those people knew full well that they couldn't afford those loans, and that's part of the culture.
The blame is everywhere.
No, I'm saying, but that's part of the culture of the government will always bail out these businesses, which is why the legislation too big to fail. These corporations are going to make now bad bets because they realize that they can't go out of business. So it's the most anti-capitalistic thing it could possibly be, which goes against all principles of our economy.
I'm Cassie Kennedy. I really can't speak to numbers or anything, but I definitely do agree with you on having regulations with businesses, because for me, I really think that capitalism is just a modern kind of excusable social Darwinism, because the gap, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger with larger corporations, and they make bucket loads of money, and it just leaves behind the little man, because it's the businesses that are at the top of the food chain. So if you don't really have those regulations, then people will just get trampled.
I killed Sophie.
Oh my gosh, I have so many points. The wage gap that has been growing since the 70s was a direct result of Reaganomics. And before that, there was a time in which, in the mid to late 60s, where the highest income residents of America were paying close to 91% in taxes. And as a fallback, Reagan saw this as a horrible thing, being that so he warped it so much to the point where the highest income people were paying less than the people who were barely making $1. And I don't know, and back to really into what you were saying about taxes being paid just on goodwill. People don't, when I said earlier about the self-centeredness of the American people, I don't mean that people are self-centered, they only think about themselves. Of course, they're bound to think about their communities and their families, but they think only about this time, about what will benefit them in the here and now, so that every crisis has been easily avoidable. And that's very bold of me to say, but it's also very true. Every economic crisis, the crisis that we see in I'm having a hard time recognizing.
Excuse me, your mind taken from me. It seemed like we're getting too deep with the policies. Back to the broader picture. It seems to me now like the libertarian is a very fundamental idealism, thinking that we first put faith into people themselves. Second, believe they can behave was righteous, they can do right things.
I would say,
one more thing. And third, the government is sticking their hands to all the pies, and we don't want that. And bollocks, let's not fool ourselves. Especially the tax thing. There's not a government to regulate it. I mean, for God's sake, people these days already trying all they can to avoid any tax they want to pay. What makes you think that cancel this requirement, let people do voluntarily? You're trying to call righteousness from the deep heart? That's a beautiful thinking. However, I really don't think that's going to work.
Well, this to answer, well, I would say the premise should be the virtue of innocent to proven guilty. People still, we have dark and light within us. There's no doubt. There's a place for criminal law, but what I would rather see is the premise of you have a conscience, you have the judgment, the autonomy to make good or bad decisions. In a civil society, we extend that to go ahead. Do good. I will not presuppose, preconceive, prejudge as you are incapable of making a good decision. What I like to see again is honoring that virtue of innocent proven guilty. So once you have that, let's say then, going back to me, there's a difference between regulation and a policy. Regulation at times implies we prejudge that you are, like mandating insurance. I think it should be abolished because it prejudges. It says, we think you are incapable of good judgment. We impose this on you. I'd like to see where the policy, well, I would just abolish that, but policy is a little different, where it says you have the capacity to make good and bad judgment. If you choose bad judgment, then there are laws that address that, but that's the difference of the premise of the virtue.
Okay, so can you afford unexpected consequences?
Yes, so, going back to the insurance? Or?
No, just in general.
Yes.
This could be ideal, this could be money, this could be physical, this could be substance, anything. Can you afford it?
Yes, in part because, one, if I have less, 40% that's going where else, if I get to choose, yes. But the other thing I think that's the reality of this, that we're shielded from, let's say mandated insurance, for example. Mandated insurance, in my mind, inhibits actual maturity in the sense of, if I have imposed insurance, I'm not going to be that conscionable because it's backing up from me. Let's say, though, if I make a mistake, let's say if there was something with the trusts that if nobody paid into the roads, I think reality would sit in and it would say, oh, we got lousy roads, let's do something about it. So I think that would actually inhibit more conscionable behavior. It would be reality, and it's sort of like who knows where my money goes. If it's bribing countries overseas, I can't really do anything about it. It's more actually natural and real, I think, because you have actual consequences from decisions. So if that's kind of going to what you were saying about how do we take care of the reality of the
consequences.
Right.
But that's law and regulations, sometimes they're made under a time of desperation. They had to enforce it in order to regain people's interest or public interest, sometimes public safety. Most of the time they are regulated or proposed for preventive. If we get rid of the regulations, let's say
get rid of auto insurance requirements.
Yeah, get rid of that, and you're going to be, oh, great, I got more money, and I don't have auto insurance. You assume they will drive more careful.
If they don't, then you take them to court. If they are liable,
so isn't that a regulation? Who gives the authority to take their car?
Well,
people or the government?
Both.
Because the government is gone.
No, excuse me. Well, that would be in terms of a dignitarian, because that's why I started a new party, because libertarian is often associated with anarchy, no government.
No, sorry.
Okay, but
yes. So at least as a dignitarian philosophy, you still have public domain, you still have governmental office, you still have civil policy. It's there. You just endow it if you want to pay for the police force, or if you don't want to give as much to a council member's salary. I say go ahead. So I think that's the one misassociation that says there's no government.
But even with that, and I understand the donation part, but if I decide not to give to the mayor, I don't want to pay him anymore. But then I have problems with my neighbors and so forth, and I call the mayor. You're the neighbor I have troubles with. You're the one who gives to the mayor. Do you think that there's going to be justice in that system?
Yes, because one of the provisions would be if what distinguishes public from private, public domain is meant in my mind for the public good, public schools, public roads. Right. So if that is free, and it's freely so, you can ride the public roads for free. There you would have the provisions in the clauses that says corporations are prohibited from contributing because it's a conflict of interest. And this also, in my mind, draws a distinction between a treasury and a bank. A treasury receives endowments for the public good. A bank is speculative. I give money, I seek to make a profit. So proper regulation would say no contributions from banks because it's a conflict of interest. So there you could still have the public good. And I think the other provision is, let's say if nobody pays for the roads. Let's say if 3 people on a road, 2 people feel the third one doesn't. The ideal, and in my mind, ideal is okay because it's ideology. These are ideals, high values. That let's say everybody can ride the road for free, including the third person that hasn't contributed. But the provision is, since they haven't contributed, they forfeit their prerogative in terms of voting on how the bridge is going to be designed, how the road's going to be designed. So you still have benevolence. You have for the public domain, it's free. but it recognizes contribution, it recognizes when someone endows or not. And if nobody endows, then I think reality sets in, the roads are lousy, so let's do something. So that's the idea.
I just wanted to clarify a couple aspects that I don't want people to misunderstand. Like, for example, when you were talking before about who was to blame after the big recession, great recession, actually it is true that, yeah, the banks did give loans with no regulation whatsoever. But the thing is that actually, like, after the dot-com crash in 2000, actually, it was the Federal Reserve, which is part of the governmental establishment, the Federal Reserve, like Arlen Specter in this case, like he stepped in and he said, well, now we're in recession, people are not spending, so there were two options, either to don't do anything, which is what the libertarian would do, just laissez-faire, like don't do anything, or actually step in and stimulate the economy. So what did they do? They lowered the interest rates in order to stimulate the economy, so people could borrow money. It was cheap credit. So this is actually when, and it had the effect they wanted to have, because that always every time you lower interest artificially, it always leads to a bubble. So that's what they did. They lowered interest, led to a bubble. Now in 2008, the bubble bursted. What did they do again? Printing money in order to create expansion, and what is going to happen? Well, now, I'm a finance major. Last week, Nasdaq just reached the level of 5,000, which last time it was reached, it was back in the dot-com. Another bubble is coming. So it's going to be the same process over and over. What the government does in this case, I'm talking in terms of economic policy, is just slowing down and painfully the day after day, it's fatal destiny, which is another crisis. That's one thing that I wanted to say. So in this case, the libertarian opinion is that it was actually of course, yeah, the banks did bad, but it all came from the Federal Reserve policy. Other aspect, I wanted to relate to you because you were mentioning that. Yeah. No. Cassie, sorry. I have classes with her. She printed my ID when I lost it, actually. Thank you. She was mentioning that capitalism leads to inequality. I agree with that. Libertarianism leads to inequality. What you have to discuss, though, is this inequality bad? There's another index, which is called the Gini index. Well, if you check this index, you will see that this inequality is not necessarily negative, because it actually what libertarianism tries to do, what the capitalism achieves, yeah, it leads to inequality, but this inequality doesn't entail poverty, though. You check economies for example, South Korea and Sudan, they have the same GDP per capita in 40 years ago. Well, Sudan stayed the same, and South Korea adopted a capitalistic way of developing the economy, where you can see how much they grow. Cuba and Spain, a country, in 1956, Cuba had twice as much the GDP per capita of Spain and Italy. I think, yeah, it was Italy. And now you can see what Cuba did, adopted a socialist way of a socialist system. Italy and Spain open to the world, to the free market. Well, not really though, because I still believe that we could open even more. That's my way of thinking. But anyways, we open. Well, you can see how Cuba is and how, you know what I'm saying? So this inequality is not necessarily bad, because that's the point. When the government tries to step in and decrease this inequality, that's when it leads to the.
I don't think that the inequality by itself is so bad. It's just the level of it, and that it's getting to a point where if you do start off with a lower level, it's near impossible to claw your way up. Is what I
Okay, so
wrap it up.
Oh, yes,
believe it or not.
I'm sorry, can I just say one more thing?
We actually believe that this has been a great conversation. We do have to be running out of time.
Okay,
so
yes.
We could have a part 2 next semester.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Yes. So yes, I guess I'd just like to thank everyone for being here, and I'm very glad to be here myself. Thank you, Evan. So the issue is long-standing. I think it'll probably continue for some time, but we'll see what happens.
And let's continue this conversation in the fall semester.
That'd be great.
Okay, thank you everyone else for coming.
Thank you.